Northern Renaissance art. In the Netherlands, new developments in art are going to begin about 1420. Low countries are going to produce especially important artists. The characteristics of the Northern Renaissance are going to be nature, reality as it appeared, however, will still be heavily influenced by the Italian Renaissance. Northern Renaissance art, we're going to see more detail throughout the paintings. Especially the background, more so than we had in the Italian Renaissance. Use of oil paints, in contrast to Italian Renaissance that used tempera. We're going to talk about the inventor of that new medium and his brother, actually, who was one of the most infamous Northern Renaissance painters. We're going to see a little more emotion than the Italian style of Renaissance art, and we're going to also kind of see some creeping in a preoccupation with death in some of these works. The Northern Renaissance was not a rebirth in the Italian sense. Of course, they didn't have access to the Roman ruins to rediscover. We're in Belgium, or what would have been Flanders, and Holland at this time. But the artwork is going to be so realistic, or as it appeared, that it's even said that Charles VI of France is going to send out 3 artists to commission portraits of possible brides and base his pickings solely on portraits because it's so realistic in nature. So we need to talk about the oil painting, and we're going to move into Van Eyck, which is our first artist. But to begin talking about this first Flemish artist, we'll need to talk about his brother first. His brother Hubert Van Eyck is actually the inventor of the oil painting, and he was so idolized for his discovery that his right arm will actually be preserved as a holy relic. But that's a whole other story. His relation, though, to this is his brother, Jan van Eyck, about whom more is known. And he's going to use this new medium to achieve a peak of realism in the Northern Renaissance. He's the most famous and innovative Flemish painter of the 15th century, perfected his brother's new medium of oil painting. He was also at the peak of realism as Van Eyck in the Northern Renaissance. Naturalist wood panel paintings will begin to use much religious symbolism under Van Eyck. He employed incredible detail in his works, as you can see in the painting. We have direct and diffused light, the texture in the clothing, even the fur on the dog, all of the little details in the painting. His masterpiece is the Ghent Altarpiece, 1432, which is not shown here, but something that you may want to look up if more interested in Van Eyck. But this is Arnolfini and his wife, and this is one of my favorite paintings. It's perhaps his most famous work. It does depict a wedding ceremony here. You can see that they're showing that they are on religious ground or performing a sacrament, because both of their shoes are off. You can see the shoes here in the background, shoes here. This is taking place, of course, in a bedroom. Many students are like, look at her belly. She must be pregnant. This must be a wedding after the fact. This isn't the case. If you look at this room, although it may look more of a small size than rooms that we see today, this would have been a very large room in Renaissance times. And this is actually their home away from home, so they're away getting married and to go on their honeymoon. And so this is the bedchamber. It's a very large room. In the clothing, his clothing being trimmed in fur, and the size of the room and its furnishings, and of course her dress, which has caused a lot of speculation about the wedding. This is a style that shows her wealth. The excess of fabric when not necessary, all of this excess of fabric is a sign of wealth. And so she is known not pregnant, and not a lot of too many illegitimate pregnancies at this time. This is just a sign of her wealth, of course, holding up her dress as her shoes are over here. Lots of symbolism in this painting. We could go into quite a bit. I really suggest that you check out the Khan Academy Smart History to look more in depth into symbolism, as we don't have as much time to spend here. But of course the dog representing fidelity or loyalty in the marriage, and we talked about sacramental proceedings, so having the shoes off. And we have the signature here because this would have actually been the witnessing of this event. You had to have a witness present. Kind of a fun fact here, this was their acknowledgement that they were married should anybody question or one try to stray. But the the tradition of bringing gifts to a wedding was how others who maybe were not so wealthy kept account that they were married. So you have a gift, your husband tries to stray, you can produce a gift, a neighbor has to account that, yes, I was at their wedding, I saw it happen, they are married, he is married to her. So an interesting tradition that is born out of the necessity to be able to prove that you were married. Also here in the background of the mirror, if you couldn't see, you can see the priest officiating and the artist, Van Eyck himself. Detail down to every little thing. One of my absolute favorite paintings. Next, however, we have Bosch, another Flemish painter. Bosch is going to give us Death in the Miser, and this is his piece of artwork right here. He's from the Netherlands as well, a master of symbolism and fantasy. His art often looks surrealistic, like a Dali of the 20th century as a comparison, and focus often on death and the torments of hell. So here we see that death theme throughout our Northern Renaissance. His works reflect confusion and anguish that people felt in the latter Middle Ages, then during the Black Death. This painting, Death and the Miser, painted in 1490, depicts the Dance of Death theme, or the Dance Macabre of the Black Plague era. So you can see death come dancing in and mischievous as this miser is ill in his deathbed, as it will be. Next we have Peter Bruegel the Elder. This is a work of his right here. He was influenced by Bosch's pessimism and satire approach, and he is going to be not as influenced by the Italian Renaissance, but will begin to focus on lives of ordinary people. Some of the names of his paintings are the Peasant Dance, which is this painting listed here, in 1568, also the Peasant Wedding in 1568, and the Battle Between Carnival and Lent, which actually recounts a biblical story. He did like to use biblical themes and put them into ordinary people events, also using satire and like to illustrate proverbs. Next we have Durer, who is the foremost Northern Renaissance artist, truly the first Northern Renaissance man, doing many things at once. Like, he's called the Leonardo of the North. He's the master of the woodcut, peak of graphic work here. Night, Death, and Devil, this graphic woodcut here, is one of his most famous works. He was the first Northern artist to master the Italian Renaissance techniques of proportion, perspective, and modeling. Some other notable works include St. Jerome, Night, Death, and the Devil, which we have just pointed out, and also the Four Apostles, which is right here. He was also kind of obsessed with his own image, and he is known for a series of self-portraits. He paints himself almost in a Christ-like pose to show the heightened quality of artists, and he will definitely show what he thinks of himself through some self-portraits here if you have a chance to ever look at more of his work. So I'm going to go back for just a second because I want to give a little more information on two others that I don't have pieces of work here for, but we also have Hans Holbein the Younger, which is a premier portrait artist of his era. He's going to paint some people you should be familiar with: Erasmus, More, numerous portraits of King Henry VIII, and also of his own family members. One of his works, The Ambassadors, encompasses some of the major themes of the era: exploration, religious discord, preoccupation with death, and the rising tide of international relations in an age of expansion, which is going to have a lot to do with our next lecture in Unit 1.3, The Age of Exploration and New Monarchs. We also have the Fugger family in Germany, especially Jacob Fugger, and he's significant in patronizing art of the Northern Renaissance. He's kind of like our Medici of the North. His fortune was a result of international banking, much like the Medici family in Florence. And then in Spain, we've already spoken about El Greco when we talked about Mannerism, and he is one of our foremost Mannerism painters, and we took a look at his work in between these two lectures. So moving on to women in the Renaissance, and this is going to be the latter and end part of 1.2, the Renaissance. Women during the Renaissance era. So we're going to talk first about how it affected wealthy women, and this is called the Querelle des Femmes, the problem of women. This is a new debate that emerged over the proper role of women in society, starting with Pizan in the 14th century. You read her City of Ladies. The debate will continue for about 600 years. Here in Europe, or as we're going to follow it. Wealthy women during this time enjoyed increased access to education, as education became more important. However, they will lose status compared to women in the Middle Ages because now women are functioning as ornaments to their middle class or upper class husbands. So they are less useful, they are needed for less, they are more ornaments or accessories of their men. Women were to make themselves pleasing to men, as Castiglione said in the Courtier. He gave a Renaissance man and woman standard, and this only applied to the upper classes. There was a sexual double standard. Women were to remain chaste until marriage, and men were permitted to sow their wild oats. Important Renaissance noblewomen at court and education and culture will include Pizan, of course, with the City of Ladies and the Book of Three Virtues. She will chronicle accomplishments of great women of history. She will write a Renaissance women's survival manual, and she's probably perhaps Europe's first feminist and an extremely well-educated woman in France, and you had a chance to read her work earlier in this unit. Next comes Isabella d'Este. And she is the first lady of the Renaissance. She set an example for women to break away from their traditional roles as mere ornaments to their husbands. She ruled Mantua after her husband died. She and her siblings were all very well educated and big patrons of the arts. She will end up founding a school for young women and write over 2,000 letters that provide a window into politics and courtly life at the time. Next is Artemisia Gentileschi, who is considered a Baroque painter. She is perhaps the first female artist to gain recognition in the post-Renaissance era. She's also the first woman to paint historical and religious scenes. Her series of Judith paintings are some of her most recognized. Female artists at this time, however, were largely consigned to portrait painting and imitative poses, also, kind of like the fruit in the bowl thing, or inanimate objects. Now, the effects on peasant and lower class women are going to be a little bit different. Their status did not change much compared to Middle Ages. According to marriage, their European family pattern would be now more nuclear. Poor people tended to be unable to support their extended families, unlike the middle or upper classes. Wealthier people and some landowning peasants tended to have extended families living with them or taking care of them, all in one location. Marriage was based on economic considerations and definitely not on love. Parents play a large role when property was involved, and dowries were extremely important in wealthy families, or gifts, or things that had to be given to marry off the woman. Also important in common families. Women tended to play a more significant role in the economy in Northern Europe, and the average age for women to get married was less than 20, and for men about mid-20s. Class issues that this caused is rich tended to marry earlier than middle classes, and poor tend to marry earlier too, or not marry at all. In Italy, the age gap between husbands and wives was much larger than in Northern Europe. We're going to have some increased infanticide and abandonment among the poor as the population begins to grow, but the means to take care of them is not growing. Increase of foundling hospitals. 2/3 of abandoned babies were girls, of course, because you're going to have to pay that dowry when they get older. Low rate of illegitimate births, however, so we're still having the concept of chastity until marriage. A dramatic population growth is going to happen until about 1650 as a result of the birth rate here. Divorce will now become available in certain areas, but still very limited, but compared to Middle Ages where divorce was non-existent. This is largely due to a modest increase in divorce in Reformation countries, so we're going to talk about that as we proceed into the Reformation. Rape was not considered a serious crime at this time. The only instance really that a woman would give a charge of rape is to regain her honor, and then not much was done to the male. And we are going to see again that increase in prostitution